Hey friends, Matt here, and today in this video, what I want to do is talk about and show you some cool things you can do with what I think is one of Ableton Live's most powerful MIDI devices, which is the expression control device. Now, this MIDI device comes in every single edition of Ableton Live, from Light all the way through to Suite, so regardless of what edition of Ableton Live you're in, you should be able to use this device and follow along with some of the stuff I'm going to be showing you in today's video. Let's dive right in. Okay, so to demonstrate some of the things you can do with the expression control device here, I've just got a simple kind of synth pattern, which sounds like this. And this sound's actually made with some presets and some racks that I'm going to be releasing sometime kind of soon. If you want to make sure you know exactly when those get released, make sure to subscribe, and you can even sign up to my newsletter. I might do like a discount code or something when it goes live. Okay, so the first thing we can do with the expression control device is actually use velocity to control basically any parameter inside of our session. So as an example here with this pattern, if I open up the MIDI clip, we can see that each of these different notes here actually have a different velocity assigned to them. I've kind of assigned the higher notes to a higher velocity and the lower notes here to a lower velocity. Let's switch back to the device view, and with the expression control device, let's switch to just this first tab here, which is this velocity tab. We can select the source on this tab. It doesn't always have to be the velocity, so we can switch it to any of these different sources, but we're going to keep it to velocity for the moment. And now all we need to do is just select where we want to map this to. So for a high velocity, we might actually want to do something like control the send to a spatial effect like delay or reverb. Let's go ahead and click on this map, and let's send a higher velocity to this delay send right here. And so now the velocity is actually going to control the level of this delay send parameter here. Now currently, because we're in Ableton Live 12, this is actually modulating that parameter, which is really awesome because it still gives us the ability to change this parameter manually, as opposed to it being overtaken like it was in previous versions of Ableton Live. We can change the modulation range here, so I might increase this up to say 90 or 80 something percent. Let's decrease this delay send all the way down. And currently the velocity is controlling this delay send in like a linear way. We can actually change this in the expression control device by simply curving this curve here. So I could make it so that it kind of favors the lower velocities, meaning that only the higher velocities are really going to send this sound into the delay. We could go ahead and do the same thing and map this to like a reverb as well. So let's now switch to this second tab, which is press. Let's change this to velocity, map this to say the long send control here, do the exact same thing, increase this output range. And now instead of curving it, I'm actually gonna go ahead and switch it to an S curve here and just pull this middle dot all the way down so that now only the higher velocities are actually gonna send into the reverb and the lower velocities won't do it at all. Pretty cool. Now it is worth noting that this modulation is not applied on a per note basis, meaning that if you have multiple notes playing at the same time, this modulation is going to basically affect every single note playing at once. You're not going to be able to get it happening individually on individual notes. It doesn't kind of work in an MPE way like that. So this is pretty cool. Let's check out some of the other things we can do with expression control. You might notice down the bottom of the expression control here, we have these two tabs. We have Rand and Increment. Let's start by looking at the Rand here. And this is basically just allowing us to send out a random value every single time a note is triggered. And we could, again, map this to basically any parameter we want. So let's go ahead and map this randomization to, say, the filter cutoff here. We can change the kind of scale of the randomization here with this random slider, and at 100% it's going to basically choose a random point on the entirety of this curve, and at lower percentages it's just going to restrict the randomization range just a little bit to help it sound a little bit more nice and natural and a little bit less intense and random. So let's increase this to maybe about 70% or so. Have a listen to what it sounds like. And much like we did with the previous velocity controls, we could also curve this so that we favor the lower values a little bit more than the higher values, which for something like randomization is really, really useful. Now this is probably also a good time to introduce the rise and fall parameters, which allow us to kind of smooth this movement just a little bit. For instance, I could increase the fall here, and if we have a look at the filter cutoff, we can see that instead of jumping between these different values that is being applied by this randomization, it kind of smoothly moves between these different values. Which can be nice for having just a little bit more smooth movement of this modulation. Next, let's check out the incremental modulation. I kind of showcased this a little bit in a previous video about creating your own simple sequencer, which you can check out kind of via the card above, or maybe I'll leave a link down below. But let's just kind of showcase what this can do. So whereas random basically chooses a random value and then applies that random value as modulation to a parameter, the incremental mode basically just increments or chooses incremental values and then allows us to basically increase a parameter over time every single time a new MIDI note is triggered. And like how we had the random slider for the random mode, we actually have this step slider here for this incremental mode, which allows us to basically choose how many steps we have across the entirety of the modulation range. So let's leave this back at the default value of 10, and let's go ahead and maybe map this to, say, the unison control here on our supersaw. Let's pull this down a little bit, increase the modulation range, and have a listen to what happens. So basically, now we have a 10-note sequence opening up this unison control. We could make this, say, a 3-note sequence instead. Or we could make it a 4-note sequence, which would probably align it a little bit better with the 4/4 time. Again, you could play around with the curving and maybe even change the output range as well. By the way, if you're interested in learning more from me outside of these free YouTube videos, I actually offer one-on-one lessons and also monthly mentorship, both of which you can learn more about on my website, matttinklermusic.com. If you're just getting started with music production, I also offer an online course which takes you through the fundamentals of creating your very own music with Ableton Live. You can check that out at courses.matttinklermusic.com. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of other stuff we can do with the expression control device as well. Let's go to this slide parameter. We can now change this from velocity, mod wheel, pitch bend, pressure, key track, expression, random, increment, slide, sustain, etc. It's really, really versatile. But what I want to show you now is just a really cool way that you can use expression control in conjunction with the CC control device to create really awesome and intricate automations on basically anything in your track. So let's go ahead and add the CC control device here just before this expression control. I'm going to collapse this first expression control and add just a second one here. And with this expression control, what we're going to do is basically use the modulation wheel to control various parameters here on our sound. So let's go ahead and instead of having this first one set to velocity, let's set this to mod wheel. And now instead of having this modulate anything on the sound that we have currently, let's collapse up this simple supersaw and simple space and kind of use this to create like a riser effect. So I'm going to add a reverb after everything here and map this expression control to the dry wet of the reverb, pull this dry wet all the way down, and let's increase the output range to 100%. So now the modulation wheel is actually going to control this dry wet. But first of all, we need to send this expression control device some modulation wheel data, which we can do using the CC control. So I'm actually going to right click on the mod wheel in this CC control, show the automation in a new lane. And now over the course of this 4 bars, let's right click and create an automation ramp from 0 all the way up to 127. So now over the course of this 4 bars, we have an increasing reverb dry wet. Let's increase the decay of the reverb here. And you might think, why not just automate the dry wet of the reverb? Well, because we can actually get away with doing some more cool things. For example, I might want to add an auto filter as well just before this reverb. Let's turn this to a high pass filter, pull the filter frequency down a little bit, and let's go ahead and map another version of the mod wheel here on this expression control to the filter frequency of the auto filter. Except this time, instead of having it linear, let's have it so that the auto filter has a bit of a curve to the modulation. Let's switch around the reverb and the auto filter, so the auto filter comes second. Let's increase the output range of the expression control device here to 100%. Maybe let's decrease it a little bit. And we could even do something like add like a phaser, for instance. I might add this phaser after the reverb, and I could pull down the dry wet here of this phaser. Let's again map a mod wheel to control the dry wet of this phaser. Except now let's have this phaser actually start at around 30 or something %. And what's really good about this approach is that we still get control over the position of the parameter we're modulating, because we're modulating it and we're not automating it to create this movement. And also, we just have a single automation lane controlling all of these different parameters in a much more sophisticated way than you'd otherwise be able to get with like macro mapping in racks as well. So I could change this to like an S curve, for instance, maybe curve it the other way. And let's have a listen to what this sounds like. So there are some really cool things you can do with the expression control device in Ableton Live, and hopefully that showed you why I think this is one of the most powerful MIDI effects in the entire program. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like down below, subscribe if you're new. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you all in the next video.